Well, welcome today. Anybody interested in housing? Hello? Anybody interested in housing? It's not a hot topic right now, is it? Well, if you're interested in housing, this is how cities are encouraging needed housing development. So you're in the right spot. I'm Mayor Dave Drotzman from the city of Hermiston, also your vice president of the League of Oregon Cities. Welcome to this afternoon's breakout session. Today's session is sponsored by Hayden Homes. Is Hayden Homes, anybody here in Hayden Homes? Okay, so on behalf of the LOC and its member cities, I'd like to encourage and thank Hayden Homes for sponsoring again this year and for the many years of their partnership with the League of Oregon Cities. Please join me in a round of applause for Hayden Homes. If you haven't done so already, make sure you're getting by their booths and thanking them for their sponsorship. They're what allow us to put these things on at an affordable price. So make sure you can get by there and thank them. I'd also like to introduce you now to our panel of esteemed speakers today. We're going to start by Becky Hewitt. She's the project director from Eco Northwest, who will be facilitating this session. Dustin Nilsson, director of planning and zoning from the city of Hood River. Kathy Greiner, city administrator from the city of Condon, and Brian Guinea, who is the Oregon field director with HUD. Please join me in welcoming our speakers.
This one works.
Oh, okay. I was promised I could just pick up a mic and it would go, so we'll try this again. So I'm going to give a little bit of an overview and give a couple of examples from places we've worked. You're going to hear more depth of examples from these folks, from their local experience, but I'll touch on a few others that we're familiar with from our work at Eco Northwest. So just stepping back a little bit, and some of you folks know Oregon's housing system really well, others might not. But having worked in Oregon and in other parts of the country, what stands out is that Oregon has really been planning for housing since before it was cool. And at the same time, our focus has really been heavily on land availability and on zoning as the main levers that we're thinking about in how cities can specifically support housing. More recently, in the last couple of years, Oregon started to realize that there's more to housing production than just land and zoning, and has started to look at other ways to address housing needs. And so right now, the state is in the process of building a better system to plan for housing. There's still some miles to go on working out the details of that, but I think it will be at least a more comprehensive system than the one we have today. So some of those recent changes to state law, housing production strategies have been a thing since 2021, but the first ones just got approved in the last few months. They bring an emphasis on equity. They start to think about a shorter planning horizon, a 6 to 8 year horizon instead of a 20-year look. And they start to look beyond zoning at other tools, financial incentives, and other tools. And they start to bring in a sense of accountability for implementing the strategies that you said you needed to deliver on housing. The Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, ONA, was passed in 2023. As I said, there's still some miles to go to get that implemented and work out all the details. But it brings in the idea that there are existing housing needs in our community that aren't being met, ones that have been created by underproducing housing for many decades, and then people who are experiencing homelessness who are in our community today. And it starts to think about how housing might need to relate to job growth, place more of an emphasis on affordability, not just housing type, and start to look at accountability for production, not just doing the strategies and zoning the land. So just an overview, and I stole this from Dustin because we made it for him, so I felt like that was fair. This is just an overview of some of the strategies that local governments can take to support housing. And the range of impact really varies, the range of effort and cost really varies too. But And the actual impacts are going to vary depending on your community and what the specific issues and barriers are in your community. So this is sort of the pattern we've seen in what has the most effect overall across the places that we've worked. But in some communities, in smaller communities, sometimes just expediting permitting, being really great to work with, having the zoning right, sometimes that's enough to allow things to move forward. So the specifics can vary. So I put together some examples from bigger cities. The formatting's a little funky here, I apologize for that. If you get access to this PowerPoint after the fact, those are all links that will take you to more information about these. So that's why I compromised the visual effect for providing information for folks after the fact. So bigger cities, they can put more resources into this. They can have more dedicated local staff. You've got everything from Portland doing inclusionary. Their market can maybe kind of handle that. A little bit questionable. They've got their own local funding sources. They've got multiple different tax incentive programs. They've got a lot going on. Bend, Tigard, those also both have pretty robust affordable housing programs. They've got property tax exemptions and SDC exemptions, and they have local funding. They're making use of land. Eugene here has a great program with land acquisition for affordable housing and several other programs. And Medford also has several affordable housing programs. If you look at smaller cities, the kind of tools that are working best for smaller communities are a little bit different maybe, but you see a few of the same ones on there. Newport and Cottage Grove are both pretty small communities that are really kind of outdoing themselves relative to the size of their communities. Both have some tax exemptions in place that target just general multifamily development in places where it's not working and they really want to see it to support their housing and other local goals. Newport has a CET to provide local funding, and they scale their SDCs by unit size. They don't exempt. And then Cottage Grove has also seen redevelopment on some public land, and more anecdotally has really fast and efficient permitting, and we've heard great things from developers working there about how important that is. And then Madras and John Day both use a form of TIF, or tax increment financing and urban renewal, as a way to provide incentives to stimulate housing development across a broad range of price points. So the local priorities needs are going to depend on your context, and they're also going to depend on your market. In a pretty weak market, so Madras and John Day are great places, but they don't have a really strong housing market right now. And so in an area like that, you're really trying to focus on just encouraging overall housing production and not worrying as much about the price point. You want it kind of across the board, because it might be hard for really anything to get built in those markets. And you might have a pretty tight housing market despite the fact that people can't afford to pay what it costs to build new construction. In a mixed market where you've got some folks who can afford a lot, but others can't, you might be trying to emphasize that moderately priced housing and try to put some incentives for things like market rate multifamily that might meet a need that's under provided in your community. And you might also be thinking about how to preserve what's affordable today, keep it standing, keep it affordable, keep it safe and healthy. In a really strong market, you can start to leverage the demand that's there for higher priced housing to try to provide some funding or some opt-in inclusionary, at the most extreme, required inclusionary zoning. And then you really want to focus on supporting regulated affordable development, because more parts of the market can kind of take care of themselves. And if you're thinking about where to start, we talked about this a little bit in kind of preparing for this session, and I think overall, the kind of get your own house in order first is a good place to start. It doesn't necessarily cost a lot of money to line up your regulations and your policies and your procedures to try to find how you can be more efficient in permitting. I mentioned for smaller communities, we've talked to a lot of developers across the state and elsewhere, and time is money. That's real. There's Construction loan interest is no joke right now. So the faster you can get them through permitting, the better. And certainty. Certainty is a big deal. So if they know that they can come in and if you tell them this is what it's going to be, that's what it's going to be, and they can get good answers on what things are going to cost, what's going to be required, what the process is going to look like, that all helps them bring down what they think they need to make on this deal in order for it to move forward, because their risks just came down. And so those are ways that you can help development move forward without a lot of cost and a lot of special programs. And then moving beyond that, you can see what kind of resources do we already have? Do we have some staff time? Do we have any public land that is surplus? You can use relationships that you've already built. And you can start to look at how you could use those to support housing. And then as you kind of grow beyond those things that you can do with the resources that you have, then you can start to look for how can we bring in new resources? How can we build some new partnerships so that we can really expand our reach? And with that, I'm going to turn it over to folks who have more specific examples from their communities to share. I'm going to turn it first to Dustin to talk about Hood River.
Thank you, Becky. We'll see if this thing does work. And I think you're going to you may see some duplicate slides that we did pay for. But I do have to give thanks to Echo Northwest. They've been hugely important through the last decade of housing strategies that has been adopted by the city. But before we get into 1983 and the first comp plan, we usually like to do a land acknowledgement. Long before Hood River had a housing problem, we had nations of sovereign tribes that lived and inhabited our community, or the community that we inhabited for millennia before us, including the Nez Perce Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, Umatilla, and we always like to acknowledge that their place in history and that importance, that this is where we live today. So fast forward 13,000 years, and we can get to the comp plan. Hood River has really always struggled with affordable housing. It really developed from a rural center into a world-class recreation center in a lot of ways in the 80s and overnight. And that really changed the dynamics and perspective of the community from an ag and forestry-based economy to an economy still wrapped around that, but a supercharged demand and world-class attention by these resources. So in 2015, after decades of work, we updated our housing needs analysis, which is the standard by which really we start to evaluate the goals around housing for the city under the state's planning program. With that, we really have two goals that stand out, and just so you know, these are your goals too. These are goals from the state's planning program. Remember, it's the state's planning program that you get to implement. So your goals are to provide appropriate type of housing and amounts of land within the urban growth boundary to accommodate the growth of all needed housing types, and that we provide opportunities for development that meets the needs of households of all incomes. When we got into our goals, we really identified a lot of issues, and these are the big three that stick out for Hood River that are really not necessarily unique to us, but particularly acute. We have a limited amount of real estate, much like you, and we have a UGB that is likely never to expand. It's never expanded in the past. It's unlikely to expand in my lifetime. So really, right away, it's important to identify that, because when we start talking about moving the needle, that's something that we have completely written off. The likelihood of being responsive to the community and expanding and gathering more real estate is really something that is not going to address the situation that we have today. We have few opportunities for multifamily, and our housing affordability, because of the demand, has continued to decrease over time, really pushing our housing prices up and pushing our rental market prices up. To address the problem, the city really identified three primary issues, and these are the three pillars that we've been working on as our playbook from 2015. given this UGB issue, we need to expand and make the most of the real estate that we have available to us. Number two was we needed to get control and regulate the secondary housing market, especially the short-term rental market. And third, we need to start developing some partnerships. The city has really never developed housing, and probably most of the cities here have never built a house. It's not what we do. It's not our sweet spot, but we need to capitalize on partnerships with the industry and with home providers that actually do put bricks and sticks together and put roofs over people's head. First thing that we did, we started looking at short-term rentals. This was started in 2016. Very intentional. We needed to make sure that if we were going to start ramping up the machine that produced housing, that we did not start losing that housing to the secondary and short-term rental market. It's counterproductive to start investing time and energy if these units are lost. It's also important to note a lot of these product and this is housing that's in place now. So it was a preservation effort to maintain probably what is your most affordable and already occurring affordable housing product in town. So actually today marks 7 years since we started this program. And we've watched the market basically stabilize over time. We actually have fewer short-term rentals in town than we had in 2016. And at the same time, while lending and construction has really been increasingly difficult, that demand for that product is manifested in the creation of hundreds of hotel units. So the demand doesn't go away. It starts to become an actual commercial enterprise. So really, you see two wins here on the city side. We stabilize and reduce competition and demand from non-community, from short-term rentals, from visitation. We push that demand to the hospitality market where they've done capital investments, and we've freed up housing. I'm hopeful that, of the 200 units that we had, almost 10% of the housing stock at the time, we hope that a lot of that starts returning to the long-term rental market and reduces that speculation and competition, really without building anything, creating more housing opportunities. This is my quick timeline that we produce. We like to look back and always make sure that we take inventory on all the work that we've done. Starting at the bottom, short-term rental regulation, you see in the middle, we start working at development review, refining our regulations, improving process, creating opportunities for various housing products, and mixing them up. And understanding that, we're looking at not just all housing, but we really have to push on our end for affordable housing. This is a product that is not delivered by the marketplace, and it takes government intervention. So when we start looking at regulations, those are kind of really in our mind focused on helping the industry provide housing opportunities, and then understanding that's a separate market from what we call capital A affordable housing, where there's government subsidies. There really needs to be significant government intervention to see these opportunities happen. So, actually, I should have left your logo up here. With the help of Echo Northwest, in 2022, we took on and really started focusing on our production strategy for affordable housing, and came up with a list of strategies that really was focused on this piece. We talked about the use of urban renewal. That's a financing tactic. It also provides authority for land control. City has used its construction excise tax powers to raise money to buy land. In this year, we were granted, at this point, $15 million to build 130 affordable housing dwelling units. It's really that long-term strategy that becomes essential. We had to have the foresight to raise money, the opportunity and the wherewithal to buy land, to gain partnerships, to create opportunities. Again, for a product that is really, it would not have been delivered unless we got involved. So looking at real estate, looking at the financing opportunities, Looking ahead, we have a bond strategy that we authorize, knowing that, again, we are going to need to be increasingly invested to see this product delivered. What else do I have to say here? And this is the project, this is the Rand Road project that really became a hallmark of our partnership to this point, where the city using the finances, and this project is actually in an urban renewal zone, to buy land ahead of time where land is really scarce, and provide the opportunity for development partners to come in and really start to deliver. So that's kind of my short, they told me to keep it short. I'm happy to talk about it, anything you want to talk about. But before I get the shepherd's hook there, I'm going to give up the mic. So, next.
Yes. Hi, my name is Catherine Greiner. I don't know who Kathy Greiner is, but it's not me. No offense. I don't go by Kathy. So, what I'm going to focus on is basically some of the projects that the City of Condon is doing. So I've been the city administrator for over 19 and a half years at Condon. I have been in Gillum County for over 30 years. And so what we looked at in Condon is we had a shortage. And the one thing we really have a shortage is, like everyone else, is workforce affordable housing. We have an assisted living facility that pays $18 to $20 an hour. We need to find a place where people can live where they work. And we know that that has gotten very, very hard to do, and it's also gotten very difficult to do for the younger people also. We were all able to buy houses when we were younger for a period of time. The people now have a very hard time buying a home. So one of the things that the City of Condon did is, I'm just going to go quickly through, we're going to go through the barriers or perceived barriers, but I'm just going to touch on those because fortunately, if all of you are around tomorrow, I'll be back to talk about what the barriers or the perceived barriers are with the City of Condon. Since we are so small, we are a town of about 700, we're in a county of just under 2,000, we have different barriers and perceived barriers than other people do. So on those, and then we'll get into some of our particular housing projects that the City of Condon has been able to tackle over the last couple years. So the one thing we did was, as usual, most everyone has issues with their zoning codes. So we did change the zoning code for residential zoning. We relaxed the standards of design. We have added more permitted uses such as duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. We've also added ADUs as a permitted use. And we added a whole new section of accessory dwelling units to our code. The other thing we did add was townhomes. I thought we added apartment complexes, but as I was going back through to prepare for this, we have not added those yet. What we did have in there and still do are boarding houses. So that's been a little bit of a challenge to try and figure out if we still actually have a boarding house in Condon. So the other thing we did, as was mentioned in Hood River, is we all of a sudden have had a big influx of short-term rentals. So 6 months ago, the City Council took it upon themselves to put a moratorium just to look over and figure out what exactly was the issue with short-term rentals and how the City of Condon was going to address them. So what they did over that period of time, and it will expire the end of this month, is we limited them to 15 short-term rentals. We have a housing stock of probably about 375. So it's only 4%. Right now we only have 6 Airbnbs in town, but we wanted to do it so we can have a handle on what's going on, and also it's open up for negotiation if we need more at some point. We also have well over of that housing stock. We have plenty of second homes of people that grew up in Condon and have come back. So that's also been an issue. We did make in the short-term rentals a more robust application process and renewal process, just so we could keep a handle on what was going on. The other thing is capacity with Condon is a barrier. It's me and a utility billing clerk and my 2 public works. So we're it. So we have an issue with having staff to take on projects of housing of any type of size. And the last thing is funding. As we all have run into funding issues, the one issue that we have kind of a leg up on a lot of small counties is we have a lot of natural resources, windmills and solar farms. They have funds that trickle down in through to the city of Condon every year of about probably about $250,000. We also have Waste Management is our biggest employer in Gillum County. So we get host fees, which is garbage tippage. So we also get some money there. Our county is also very generous with grants. And one of their big parts in their strategic plan is giving money for housing projects, knowing that we have some issues. So let me go back. So the one thing I really want to focus on in this is actually our projects that the city of Condon has taken on. So the first one we did about 6 years ago, well, not that long ago, probably about 4 years ago, the school passed a bond to build a brand new grade school. So they were trying to unload their 100-year-old 45,000 square foot grade school. Along with that came a play field, or the high school baseball field, which was not to standard for a baseball field. So the city went to them. I have an excellent council. I have a very progressive council. We went to the school and said, okay, we'll take your building, but you've got to give us that baseball field, and we're going to turn it into housing. And so we did. We went ahead and took on the school, which that's another project in here. We rezoned it. We divided it into a small subdivision of 6 buildable lots. It was a little less to develop because it was already on developed streets. We had to develop one street, and the water and sewer were already there. The city went out and got grants from Gillum County for housing, and when we did that, we got 65% of putting the infrastructure into these 6 lots. We then put out an RFP, and we got a developer, a local person, that bought all 6 lots for $60,000, fully developed, with conditions. The conditions is that they had to have houses on those lots within 2 years. We have since got it to within 3 years of signing over the land. They had to be stick-built. They could not be manufactured homes. They could be modular homes. They had to abide by state building codes. And they could also have multifamily use on that. As of a month ago, all 6 lots have been sold. 4 of the lots are going to have multi-units on them, and 2 of the lots already have stick-built homes on them. One is for rent and one is for sale. If someone wants a lovely home in Condon, I can get you the information on a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home on the baseball field lots. Our other project was the Fairway Housing Project, is what we're calling it. The city owns approximately 9 acres north of our municipal golf course. When I first came to the city in 2004, it was kind of a pipe dream. I didn't think I would be able to see this developed in my tenure at the city. We have since got water and sewer to the Fairway Housing Project. We have, we're in the process of developing a subdivision with close to 45 lots. 20 of them will be on the face of the golf course in the back. And how we paid for that was, again, we got a grant from the county. We also had ARPA fund, good old COVID. If there was anything good about COVID is we got a little bit of cash in our pockets from it. The other thing is we got a state of Oregon grant through our state representative, Greg Smith, for $166,000 that had no strings attached. So at the same time we did the baseball field, we got water and sewer to the property line of these 9 acres. So we're still working on that. We have a conceptual drawing of what it's going to be, but at this point we do not have them set out, and we don't have the, we're not saying if they have to be stick-built or have deed restrictions on them yet. The council hasn't come to that decision. The next one, the Condon Grade School. So when we inherited the Condon Grade School, we had a designer in town come by and do, he did designs for, there's 2 wings with 4 classrooms in each wing. Most of the classrooms are about 1,300 square feet. We had the designer break out them each as an apartment, and the 1,300 square foot are actually 3-bedroom, 2-bath apartments. So we just started some plans. We went through all the environmental assessments. We did phase 1, phase 2. Since we are a governmental unit, it was more profitable to get grants to hand it over to the Port of Arlington's nonprofit, Environmental Century. Environmental Century is just for abatement of property, and it just so happens I am a port commissioner, so it went to my other job as a port commissioner, and they have taken on that, and they're in the process of abating that. I think it's going to be mixed use when we're all done. I think it might have some offices in the middle. It still has a gym, and then I think they're also going to provide some housing in this. So as we move forward with that project, it's still, we're getting community input on the old grade school. The last two is the AARP ADU plans. We were reached out by our planner, Kirk Fatlin, who is also the city of Morrow and multiple other cities in our region, that the city of Morrow was doing a grant from AARP to develop buildable plans of ADU units that they would get the plans to be ready to go to building codes. So we put in for the grant, and with that, we have 2 ADU plans, 1 bedroom and a 2 bedroom, and all you have to do, anyone from our area can get it for free off our line. If you have a builder, it's ready to go to a lot and be built. And so we thank the city of Morrow for that assistance in that. The final project that we have going, and this is more of, is second-story housing. So we have a historic district that was in the front. One of the front pictures is our historic district. You can build in the second stories. You can house people in the second story of those buildings. And some of them have had apartments. So in the last year, our county court and our chamber, which is a regional chamber, it's called the Oregon Frontier Chamber of Commerce, and they grouped with Oregon Main Street. There's a grant out for that there's a county grant, and there's an Oregon Main Street grant, and then we haven't been in big discussion with them yet, but they received over $250,000 to start putting 9 housing units in 2 of our historical buildings in the city of Condon for that. One of the main things I do want to say is that of our projects that we have done is the focus has always been to provide for our residents and to have them a place to work. So we are also trying to work with Waste Management, with the Chamber of Commerce, with Gillum County, the city, the school district, and any of the other. We also have, we are the county seat, farm services, so we have a USDA regional center. And what we're finding, and I'm sure everyone has a story, is a couple years ago, we had a teacher come to town to apply for a job. And they accepted the job, had an interview, accepted the job, started looking for a house, came back to the school and said, thank you, but no, I cannot find a place to live, and can't accept the job. And I'm sure everyone has those stories. And so what we're trying to do too is find a way to connect the employer to the employee and has that as an incentive to come. So that's mine, and I'm going to hand it over to Brian.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Insights for cities on how you create or preserve more affordable housing. It might be a surprise to some of you, certainly others in this room, not at all, but the largest driver, the largest funder for affordable housing in the United States is what's called the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit, LIHTC. LIHTC is administered by the Internal Revenue Service, and that means the IRS, not HUD, not OHCS, not anybody else, the IRS is the biggest funder of affordable housing in the country. And it was started in the 1986 tax law by President Ronald Reagan. The IRS funds affordable housing, and President Ronald Reagan started it. Kind of shocking to see how far some of the conversations have come in 40 years about affordable housing, but a program that was started to invest, to get the federal government out of large housing projects and get money for workforce housing into economic development activities for private activities. There are 9% and 4% tax credits. They're administered through Oregon Housing Community Services. They're extremely competitive. When LIHTC came out, 9% tax credits were always going to be competitive, but the idea was that 4% tax credits would be almost unlimited, but they have to be paired with state bonding, state lending, and affordable housing is in such high demand that now even 4% tax credits are very, very competitive in this state. So that's the biggest driver. I'll kind of use that to frame how we talk about funding for affordable housing projects as we go into this. My name is Brian Guinea. I am your state director here for Oregon for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. When I'm not out helping you all create strong, inclusive communities, you could usually find me going for a walk or playing with my dog or having an Oregon-made adult beverage. Preferably, I'm doing all three of those at the same time. I am joined today by Kirsten Ray. She's our senior management analyst at the out of the Portland field office. She is a nationally published author on housing development in rural communities in the West. So any easy questions at the end of my presentation, send my way. All the hard questions, go send over to her direction. If you're not one of the 14 cities, 3 counties, or 3 state agencies that receives direct annual entitlement funding from HUD, then you are going to either Business Oregon or OHCS for competitive funding, or you're going to grants.gov. And grants.gov is about as easy as putting together a piece of IKEA furniture. It is, I mean, you will see funding titled for rural communities, and not a single community in Oregon will qualify, or even the West, because they're talking about rural Pennsylvania, rural New York. It is a very complex way to find your federal funding. So we're here today, we're going to be here for the rest of the week to try to make those connections and demystify some of that funding for your communities. All right, who's who in affordable housing development? This is League of Oregon Cities, so we're going to talk about cities' primary role: responding to the housing needs of your constituents, recruiting partners, buying down the cost of development, land banking. Some of the things that you can do to make development, which is extremely competitive, much more attractive. Here today we have Mayor McGriff from Oregon City, who's partnered with her local housing authority, the state, nonprofit housing developers to bring affordable protected units to Oregon City. We've got Mayor Hoy from Salem, who just was able to secure a congressionally appropriated grant, which I think we're talking about in later sessions this week, for opening veteran-specific housing. Hood River, Rand Road, 50 units, partnering with the local housing authority, the local community action agency, the economic development district, the state to bring these funding. North Plains, one of the fastest growing housing communities in the state, also very successful in bringing a lot of investment. The counties, many of the counties have a housing department or a single staff person or half an FTE. Those can be a resource when competing for state funds and federal funds as well. Certainly you need private developers and nonprofit developers who are going to do the work. Your nonprofit and private developers, as they seek the tax credits and then they go to resell the tax credits, certainly all the major developments involve a private lender, and there are many across the state that are very experienced in doing affordable housing. CDFIs are an important player. Philanthropic organizations, a lot of kind of last-minute gap funding or emergencies that develop on your project sites, philanthropic organizations can come into. Public housing authorities. I'll talk about the public housing authorities in Oregon in a couple more slides, but probably one of the biggest drivers of receiving direct investments from HUD, but also the organizations in your communities that have housing choice vouchers. Vouchers for an individual that can take those to a private landlord and go lease up a spot on the private market. The housing authorities are also able to take about 20% of their housing vouchers and convert them into what we call project-based vouchers. So the subsidy, instead of going into an individual, it then goes directly into the project, and that can help. Rand Road has a couple project-based vouchers in it. That can buy down the cost and make it much more attractive for a developer. Community action agencies receive direct funding from HUD through OHCS to the community action agencies. We have 9 federally recognized tribes in Oregon. They receive direct funds from HUD for housing. They are able to take some of their funds and deploy those outside of reservation boundaries where tribal communities exist in some of your communities. And then pretty close to the community action agencies, the continuum of cares are the 8 federally designated areas that receive funding for homeless response, emergency housing, rapid rehousing in the state. So this is who receives direct annual funding. The 14 cities, they have a large enough population. They meet a national threshold where they receive a direct appropriation from HUD every year for Community Development Block Grant. Some of these receive home investment partnerships and some other programs I'll talk about in a minute. 4 counties in the state are direct entitlements, and then we directly fund Oregon Housing Community Services, the Oregon Health Authority, and the Oregon Business Development Department, Business Oregon. We have the 8 Continuum of Cares, the Rural Oregon Continuum of Care, the ROC, Community Action Partnership of Oregon covers the balance of state that is not co-located in a large or major metro area. All right, some of our flagship programs are the major drivers. Probably everybody in this room has heard of, seen of, used Community Development Block Grant. If you are not one of those cities, I think Mark from Business Oregon is here. I think I saw him in the back. There he is. Your regional development officers at Business Oregon are the entry point for how to get CDBG in your community. The state gets to decide, Business Oregon gets to decide the method of distribution and what projects are going to be funded. It's competitive. You've got to go before the Infrastructure Financing Board. But very, very highly qualified staff in your regional development officers and who can bring these projects, work with you to bring these projects and hopefully get them funded. The Home Investment Partnership Program, these are for grantees that are participating jurisdictions. This is money for bricks and sticks, new housing developments, putting in money to buy down the cost of these programs. The Housing Trust Fund goes to Oregon Housing Community Services. And then on the other side of the aisle for the public housing authorities, 22 public housing authorities in the state, the Housing Choice Voucher, this is what is called a Section 8 voucher or an HCV. This goes directly to an individual. Usually there are extremely long wait lists for these vouchers, a year and a half. They're highly competitive. And then unfortunately in Oregon, once you've made it to the top of the list and you have your Housing Choice Voucher, almost all of our communities have 0% vacancy. So now the recipient has a certain amount of time to go out and actually find a landlord that's going to rent to them. And so we'll work across the state with jurisdictions and their public housing authorities on landlord recruitment campaigns to try to incentivize landlords that might be sitting on the sidelines to accept these Housing Choice Vouchers. A housing authority can also take up to 20% of their allocation of vouchers and project-base them and put the subsidy in a bricks and sticks building and preserve the affordability for units within that building, and then the operator gets to decide who's coming in for that. Another big thing we do are loans or credit insurance or backing credit for the private developers. The 221D4 construction rehab loan is the major driver of multi-unit, multi-family buildings, 50 units, 100 units. We closed 15 of these deals in the state last year. Once a developer's lender can go through the application process, which it's federal funds, so it's not the easiest application process, but once they can get through, these are very attractive products for 50 units, 75 unit, 100 unit, major developments. So there's a gap when we're talking about if your community needs 8 units or 12 units. We don't have a lot of products for that, but we do have some of the flagship loans, and happy to go into a lot more detail if you've got questions about that this week.
How many did you say were passed in the state?
We closed about 15 deals last year. Yep. All right, community action agencies. I'm sure you're familiar with your community action agency. HUD emergency solution grants go through Oregon Housing Community Services. Oregon Housing Community Services distributes the money for the community action agencies. This is rapid rehousing. This is homeless assistance. This is rent assistance. This is job training. We've got some executive directors of some of our community action agencies, I think, here in the audience, and they can tell you all about, there you go, all about what they do and all the valuable work that's provided to the state. 22 public housing authorities in the state. Some of these are county agencies nested within county departments. Others are their own unit of government, and they have their own board. Probably the most important takeaway from this slide is everybody in this room, if you don't know who your local public housing authority executive director is or who their staff is, we're happy to put you in touch or reach out to them. The housing authorities, they maintain these wait lists. They have a pretty good pulse on the development pipeline of what's happening in your community, and they need to be an essential partner for any of these conversations. It's not on this slide, and I don't have a slide about this, but in Oregon, in addition to the public housing authorities, we have about 450 multifamily HUD-assisted properties. These are private landlords, everything from management companies that own hundreds of properties in the state to a single mom-and-pop landlord who have contracts with HUD to maintain rents at certain affordability periods. We're happy to share. We have public maps, and we can show you where all these multifamily properties are. But I bring this up because HUD is not creating any new multifamily contracts. Relies on congressional appropriation. Everything that's out there is kind of out there, and unless there's some major change in Congress, we don't think we're going to get any more of these. But what we can do as costs go up, as the cost to turn units over, as these buildings age and need recapitalization, HUD can adjust the budget with the landlords and give them more money. We would rather give them more money and keep them being a landlord for low income than to see them turn in their keys and leave the program. So if you know of or hear of a 202 or an 811 program or someone in your community that's got project-based rental assistance and they're having some trouble, they need a new roof or a foundation or a parking lot, please let us know. We have flexibility. There's things we can do. The last thing we want to see are these HUD-assisted landlords turn in their keys because we're just not making any more of them. Couple success stories real quick. Back in the day, 20, 30 years ago, it wouldn't be unusual for HUD to be a single funder for a project. And as costs have gone up and the amount of entitlements has grown across the country, but the budgets have remained the same, our share of these projects is less and less and less. So it really does take low-income housing tax credits, private lender, Oregon Housing Community Services, HUD funding, Business Oregon funding, all of these things, U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA Rural Development funding to make these projects work. A couple of success stories I want to pull out. White City 1 and 2, low-income housing tax credit, 54 units. They use National Housing Trust Fund, they use state funding, and then USDA Rural Development project-based rental assistance. We've got a lot more literature on each one of these success stories. If you come find us later, we can talk about this. Riverbend Place in Ontario. This was a Section 202. This is for the Elderly and Senior Citizens Project. Again, low-income housing tax credit, the Home Investment Partnership Program, state funding, project-based rental assistance. Milton Freewater, 24 units, 9% low-income housing tax credit, state funding. And then McMinnville was able to use Habitat for Humanity of Oregon funding, the SHOP program, and then USDA Rural Development mortgages for not just rentals, but creating homeownership opportunities for residents. On that theme of it takes all these different funding sources, we at HUD, with our state agencies, will come in and help you navigate as you're looking at layering all these different sources of funding together into one project. As you're looking at braiding different sources of funding together, one of the big themes is please, and we were very active with LOC and the legislature this year, like please use your federal money first. If there is $1 of federal money that you can spend before the state legislature creates a program or you go to your county or your city or your local funds, we don't want to see any of the appropriated funds for Oregon left on the table. Oregon does a really good job. We punch above our weight class compared to other similar sized states at deploying federal resources that come into the state. And as a result, we've gotten additional emergency rental assistance. We've gotten additional housing vouchers that other states are not able to spend as fast as us. But please help us come and get those, not have to return any of that money to the Treasury when it can be used here in the community. When we talk about affordable, 60% of the area median income. So we're talking about basically workforce housing and workforce wages. Just polling here in Lane County and Eugene where we are, 60% of the area median income for one person, $35,000. All of these charts are available online, and you can kind of plug in your zip code and find out what is 60% of AMI in your community, what projects you might qualify for max income, max rent. So how do we get there? Shamelessly stole this from Northwest Housing Alternatives, so if they're here in the room, they can see this slide, but this is some of the things they look at when they're putting together their pro forma and looking for all these different sources of funding of their capital stack, how much equity, how much grants, how much loans, and then where the low-income housing tax credit comes in. Basically, the smaller the loan you can get, the lower you can keep the rents for your tenants. So we're looking at market rate development, about 70% loan, 30% equity. When you're able to get all the way down to the 9%, the most competitive tax credit, and we've got some tax credit lawyers also in the room here, so you can hunt them down later today too. If you can get the 9% low-income housing tax credit, your loan is 10%, your grants are 10 to 20%, and you're able to keep those affordable rents to your most vulnerable folks that are going to be renting these units. This is just an example. I pulled out all the details from the project, so this could be anywhere, but a $27 million project, low-income housing tax credit about $8 million, the Oregon boost about $2 million, $3 million loan, lift funds, GHAP, sponsor equity, and you can see, it's no surprise to anybody here, the biggest costs for your communities are going to be the land acquisition and then getting the infrastructure to the site, stormwater, power, utilities, all that kind of thing, and then bringing in your construction folks as well. All right, there has been 2 or 3 Congresses now, earmarks are back. CDF, Congressionally Directed Spending. There are 53 of these grants that have come to Oregon, about $80 million. Again, I can share with you, you can look up which community these are and what made a successful project and not, and I think there's actually a session on this tomorrow, or one of these sessions with your field staff from all of our congressional representatives, and they're going to talk about this process. But in the last 2 years, as interest rates have gone up, materials, lack of construction, a lot of these projects that have been in the pipeline for a couple years just saw $2 million hole blow in the budget, or $1 million hole, or some emergency. These grants were able to come in and plug those holes and keep these projects moving. I think the Salem Veterans Home, the YMCA Salem Veterans Housing, a congressional grant came in right at the last minute and got this project over the finish line. So if you're curious of what kind of projects get funded and which ones have been successful, we can share this with you or track down your field staff for your representatives and your members of Congress here this week. Just a couple initial steps in all federally funded projects, whether it's us or EPA or USDA rural development, community engagement, environmental reviews. They don't have to be as scary as maybe you've heard. And we have a lot of technical assistance where we can assist in the environmental review process. We're going to go through what's called subsidy layering review. So we're going to take an index of all of these different sources of funding and, number one, make sure you're not missing out on anything you might qualify for, but then look at the different layers and make sure something's not being double counted or you're providing a subsidy where you already have one. With federal funds, there are labor standards and prevailing wage, much like with state projects. There's going to be relocation requirements. A lot of projects, due to having land constraints, are going to require you to completely knock down your existing structure, temporarily relocate residents, and then move them back. And then some of the other processes that go with our project. So, next steps. Takeaway from today, connect with your administrating agency for these funds. We can help with that. Review all the available information on when the grant timelines are happening. I know there's been a lot of work, a lot of process at the state level to try to consolidate the notice of funding calendars and to get all the funding calendars on the same timeline, because some of your communities will end up locking away some of your funds that you require for match or something like that, and they're just sitting waiting for the other funding to arrive, and that's not the best, highest use of those funds. We have a lot of funds available for technical assistance to assist your grant writers or other folks in the community with this. And then that's the takeaway is just give us a call. We were out in Seaside last year. We will go host what is equivalent to a one-stop for infrastructure financing. We will do that for housing development funding. We'll bring HUD, we'll bring USDA Rural Development, we'll bring EPA. We will also bring our state colleagues at Business Oregon, at DLCD, it's our DLCD directors in the back of the room there, and our OHCS folks. And what we want to do is we want to sit down in your community, and we're not looking for projects that are shovel-ready a little earlier in the timeline. If you have projects and you're trying to figure out the capital stack, or you've got a piece of land in your city to donate, but you're trying to recruit a developer, or you're trying to recruit somebody to come in and do the grant applications, we'll workshop those projects and have you come away with kind of a plan of starting the financing process for that. So that's my presentation, and happy to take any questions.
Did you want to start out with the question? You're welcome to.
Yeah, so.
Okay, this one works. So it's time for audience Q&A. Hi, everybody. I'm here with LOC. I didn't know, Becky, if you wanted to start some, or do we have any questions from the audience for our panelists? First of all, thank you for these really great examples. I'm here for right here.
My question's for Dustin. I'm curious about, hi, from City of Corvallis. And we are struggling on the, well, some might think we're not, because I think we're getting upwards of 400 new units of affordable housing, but we are so desperately way in the red. So that's like a little blip for us. But you talked about affordable housing ordinance, and I was just wondering, could you elaborate on what is going to be parts of that? It was to expedite affordable housing for developers, so I was just curious what that's going to look like.
So we started off with the affordable housing production strategy, which took a step back and looked at what were the various ways that the local government could intercede into the development of affordable housing. One of the items that came out of that as a recommendation strategy was an affordable housing regulation, which in some ways the idea was modeled after Senate Bill 8, otherwise known as SB 8, which provided expedited reviews. It focused on clear and objective standards. It also focused on really competitive advantages that separated that capital A affordable housing from what the market was delivered. Typically, our code and most of your codes is just all housing. You know, it's housing is housing, whether it's directed to the market, whether it's the most affluent, with little differentiation between that affordable product and the most. This is an ordinance and that I will likely be developed. Actually, credit to DLCD, who helped fund our Echo Northwest work, to make some modifications to our code that would provide unique, customized code that addresses the affordable housing product itself. Reviews, process, setting aside process. One thing that I think we're really acutely aware of is, you know, affordable housing, unlike market housing, is often built around also a time frame. Although risk and time can be really harmful and damaging to any development project in the private sector. your affordable housing providers, if they start missing deadlines that are state-driven or funding-driven, it can be a death nail. So this predictability and timing, and it's really to keep it held harmless from some really damaging effects, is something that that type of ordinance is intended to drive. Do you need density bonuses? Do you need additional height bonuses? Do you need added protection in the process in order to keep it, really almost insulated from, and I hate to generalize as a NIMBY, but as really damaging pushback when it's something that is really more, I would consider it more sensitive to the impacts of disruption. That makes sense? Yeah. All right.
Hello, I was wondering if you could talk just a little bit more about that AARP ADU plan, both the partnership, what it got you, how it aligns with your codes and permit process and whatnot.
So, sorry, this was, it was a very, very simple grant actually, and it didn't really align with our codes until we changed our code to allow a permitted use for ADU. So the grant, I was just a letter of support for it, so our planner wrote it, but it was just to provide plans that were shovel-ready is not the word, but at least plan review ready to go. Does that answer that? Go ahead.
I think Building Codes Division 2 this year is going to end up with some, at the state level, some, permit-ready plans. I think that was one of the mandates that came down from the state, is that the state's Building Code Division should also have some ready-built plans for folks. Now just find a contractor.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention earlier too that all of the slides that you saw today, they are in the LOC app. So in all their contact information, I saw him raise his hand back there, Ariel. I saw some of you taking photos, but they are in the app, so you can see the more detail on those apps.
Hey, my name is Kevin. I'm up in Beaverton, so thank you, Eco Northwest, for so much of the work you've done up in Beaverton. My question is probably for Hood River or Condon about short-term rentals. We've talked about short-term rental policies up in Beaverton, but we've got a problem where we don't really know how many we have. So I'm curious, how did you get that information to even know where to start? And then what was it like creating that code? Was it complex? Was it easy? Because it seems really great seeing it up on the PowerPoint. I'm curious about feasibility and how it actually works.
Go ahead.
You can go first if you want. If you have.
I'm going to say mine's really short. We're a town of 700. We know.
Does not translate to Beaverton.
No.
You took a census. Everyone's family had the
I know
account.
where they live. I know who lives where they live.
So we had a couple. I think that the number one way is the internet. Your short-term rental its marketplace is the internet, and so there's no small footprint that these folks leave. We started out, before we had any information, we started looking at utility bills. And part of that was we really were trying to identify both the secondary housing market, so the part-time, and we started looking at, okay, who periodically used less than, for us it was like when your water is turned off or less than 1,000 gallons a month. We started flagging those as not full-time residents. So early on, the impact of secondary homes and short-term rentals on a long-term housing market often has the same impact. It's a roof, it's a lot, it's a investment property that's being monetized and not necessarily addressing your housing need. So we started off with utility billing. Now we spend, as a part of our program, we spend money every year for it's Granicus host compliance, and it's Troll. Troll's internet looks for and finds all the short-term rentals that are getting advertised on the out there in the marketplace, and will tell me whether they have a license or not. And it's a part of the compliance. and it was part of the regulation, the package. It wasn't just to regulate this, it was to regulate it and management over time. And so we built in the idea that you need to have some tools in administration to not only license these, but to ensure compliance so that it remains effective. It makes no difference whether you write the most eloquent, effective regulations if you can't enforce them. So I'm sure you could probably wander out in the exhibit hall and somebody's going to be able to find you a compliance package that it surfs the internet, it's automation, and it flags me or some of my staff when it finds stuff out there. So.
Just one note as a data person and somebody who has kind of done or worked with our teams as they try to collect data for cities that are trying to get a count or a sense of the quantity of short-term rentals. Just something to be aware of. Trolling the internet is definitely part of the system, but something to be aware of is that not every listing is a unique short-term rental dwelling unit, right? There is a many-to-one relationship, and then you have things that are short-term rental, things that are second homes. You have all these sort of different things that are like a vacation home, but sometimes I have somebody else stay in it. So that there's a lot of gray area, and there's a lot of listings. You can have it listed in multiple places. You can have multiple listings for the same unit, and so there's a lot of data cleanup and kind of review. And if you're trying to get to a count, if you know, like, I would like any listing, I need to check if it exists in my permit system. That's a little bit like, it's not easier, but it's a little bit of a different system than if you're trying to get to how many unique dwelling units do we have that are used as short-term rentals. It's a little bit trickier to get to that, but you're certainly still starting from who is listing this on the internet available for short-term use.
And as far as difficulty, yeah, there's the human cleanup. I mean, Beth and Oscar, we and our utility folks went through this and had to do a lot of data scrubbing to make it respectable and useful. The ordinance itself, I wouldn't consider it particularly difficult and complex by way of its rules and its regulations. I think for us, we have some pretty unique hallmarks that I think are translatable. In the residential zoned areas, we require it to be the owner's primary residence. And that, to me, is the single most important thing that we do that is set aside and really naturally limited the number of people that want to do this. It needs to be your primary home. We have no cap, we have no ratio. That itself is really the thing that controls its growth. So writing the ordinance is not tough. Managing the process and the difference of opinions and the community impact is significant. Our community really struggled over it, and the difference of opinions between those that call it right to property community. We had interest groups form over the matter. We had people who basically stated, that was the only reason they could live there. They relied upon this passive income. So that part is, I couldn't overstate the difficulty and the divisiveness that can occur when it comes to the culture of a community. And there's a lot at risk. This is not a small dollar operation. It can be significant. You're talking about regulating people's homes. That's serious business. And so politically, very challenging. You're talking about taxes and homes. You're not going to unpack that. Technically, I would take our ordinance, change your name. It's good to go. I believe in it. It's hard. I got to give a lot of credit to our electeds who really slugged it out and really tried to manage a community impacted process. But it's important. It affects housing. It was the first thing we did, and we invested time and energy in that. So,
hi. I have a question for both of you. Actually, two questions. One is, did you have any issues with getting your community buy-in with affordable housing as opposed to considering it low-income housing and worrying about who is moving in, like the homeless transitioning in. And the second question also is, once you have the affordable housing, did you have any issues with maybe more calls for service for law enforcement, as throughout my career I've seen in maybe more affordable housing that being an issue?
So on ours, we did have a little bit, when we started going through just the subdivision for the baseball field, we did have some pushback by some of the neighbors. Most of it was NIMBY, not in my backyard. And not a lot of, one happened to be a state policeman that lived in the neighborhood. And he said, if you build multi-units, you're gonna have us over there all the time. While he's telling us, he's looking at a duplex right across the way. And they had never been called to that duplex. So even though we had that, we had some pushback saying, if you're gonna have low income, you're gonna have, people not in your community you don't want. And they didn't realize that those people were already here, and they're not bad people. It's just they don't make as much money as possibly you. So I think a lot of it, since a lot of our community knows people that are in that issue, we don't have it. And fortunately, the homeless problem, no one wants to live in Condon in the winter. And there's not any services for them to access because we're very remote. So we don't have that issue. But yeah, we did have some pushback.
Absolutely. No doubt. And I think for us, a lot of times, anything that involves change, this doesn't happen organically. You're talking about getting involved, and so it feels like change. So immediately folks are put on guard. We definitely went to court. So it's not just posture. We'll litigate it out. But I think in terms of, the fear factor of fear of change, things are changing. And I think there's a bit of a reckoning in the community that, the people that are moving to Hood River aren't poor people. You're talking about the longest standing members of your community. Those that are the most at risk of being displaced are the people that have been there the longest. And I think that, looking at that and seeing, our problems are so acute that it's not that we can't get teachers, police, fire. We're running low on the ability to have new doctors move to town. You don't get doctors, you don't get engineers, you don't get public works directors. But the people that are really the executives of your community, if they're not coming from generational money, it really is. The community has to acknowledge it's a serious exposure. So if you don't start doing something about not just those that are most at risk of displacement, the longest, this also affects the most affluent in the community. You won't have soccer moms and dads. You're not going to have these folks. You're not going to have the kids that live in your community. You're not going to have a generational community because you're going to be displaced. You look at 100 kids that graduate from high school. If they don't live with their parents, I couldn't tell you that 10 of them will have a place to live in town. Now that's sad. We don't have a place for you to move into. You were born and raised here, and now it's time for you to go. That is the straight talk and the serious part that helps counteract some of that fear factor.
I'm going to add just one more thing. And one of the things we focus on is workforce housing, and unfortunately, some of it coincides with low-income housing. And so I think in those regards, one of the issues that we've been struggling with in Condon is how do we connect the lower paying jobs to nice housing? And how do we not import a bunch of people because we have low income housing? And I've been told, oh, that's not going to be your problem. I do worry. I just want to make sure that, again, the people that work in Condon have a good place to live in Condon.
Did you want to add anything about that?
Oh, this one up.
Sorry.
What is it?
Perfect. A lot of communities, there's understandable concern around this argument of if we build more of X type of housing, we will import more of Y type of folks. And we have a lot of good data your community action agencies have a lot of good data on the point in time count. And we can help provide, and we can help tell the story through data of the majority of unhoused folks in Oregon, somewhere like 7 or 8 in 10 are from within your local community. And there is just not this, we do not see in the data like, oh, a community built this new facility and all of a sudden their unsheltered problem went up or calls went up. Like, there's just so much unsheltered homelessness that is either in the community or out in forest lands or things like that. And we can help tell that story. There's something else I was going to say on that, but I forgot. I'll come back to that.
I think one thing that helps illustrate the issue too, and you'll see this in a lot of communities, that you'll see the infographic that shows the spectrum of how much do folks make and how much of a family makes from, and your workforce in affordable housing is oftentimes set up to families that are earning more than $50,000 per year. This is not supported living. This is and I hate to even call it workforce housing because but it's income driven. Productive members of your community are not being served. Like, to make $50,000 and not have a place to live, I would hardly characterize you as the menace to society that people will paint. And these are real folks. These are real families with real jobs and really no place to live. And you go back to your goal. It's our responsibility to help produce and provide opportunities for those families.
Got a question for Dustin. Seemed to be pretty popular. It briefly mentioned in one of your slides about regulating second homes. Is there anything that Hood River is doing aside from managing the short-term rentals that manages anything to do with second homes?
Second homes, the only thing that I see as possible or lawful, it has to do with utility pricing. In terms of our ability from the state level to tax them differently or to have some sort of real estate transfer tax for a second home or some sort of homestead exemption. Really, we don't have anything on the local level to help address that. So, the only thing that we do, and it comes down to short-term rental, that, if you can have a second home and you don't need a passive income stream to make that a net loser in your portfolio, not big enough that you need to offload it, you're outside of my reach. Now, if you need to translate that and you need that second home to make money for it to become something that you have, now it kind of comes into that short-term wheelhouse, and we can address that. But the most affluent, I really don't see anything to where we have any power over that or any authority. And if you come up with something, I'll let me know. So, anyone in the back, share, please.
I got a question for you guys. Catherine, we have a city very similar to yours just south of Hermiston, 600 people, Echo. And they really struggled with infrastructure costs, and they've been 600 for 2 decades, right? So how much of the barriers that you guys are running into have to do with just access to funds and being able to provide affordable infrastructure so that those costs aren't passed along to the home builder and then to the recipient of that house?
Once again, we are from a county that has money. And we hate to tell that, so anybody from the state or feds, you did not hear that from me. We've been very fortunate with the county sharing their WIN money, their waste management funds, and so we have not had to go into debt for our funds in the last 20 years since I've been there. The city of Condon does have a few wastewater funds that loans that we took out with USDA in the 90s when we built a new plant. So the barrier is you see it everywhere else, is not having a county that may be bringing in a lot of money. I'm looking at Umatilla County with, of course it's more towards Morrow County, I guess, that has most of the Amazons and the port But I mean, we all have to work together for those funds, and that sounds oversimplified and very naive. I get that. But it's just really hard to get some of that money now. And I would think with the money coming from the federal government right now, that ECHO would be in prime position to get some of that money. But once again, we come down to, they're a city of 600 and they don't have the capacity to apply for the federal loans. And I want people to know too, on those federal loans and the COVID money, they were great. But to get that COVID money, I had to give them a facial recognition of myself, my social security number, my driver's license to get the money. It was not something that I could do for the city. They had to get all of my private information so I could get reimbursed or get those funds. And so it is a very strange way to get money from the federal government. And so happened to have the governor in town a couple weeks ago and mentioned that to her, and she was surprised. But I guess we hope that the government doesn't abuse my personal information. So I don't know what to tell you other than, I mean, I just think if there's a way for the state and the feds to assist the small communities such as us, that would be an ECHO and Helix and Fossil, and it would be well worth the money spent.
So anywhere outside of the I-5 corridor that we go, capacity is the issue. There's at 60,000 foot level, there's all this federal money that in the Inflation Reduction Act, in the Build Back Better Act, in the bipartisan infrastructure law, $27 billion to the EPA. EPA is going to get in the housing funding game. But how do you get that money? And then let's say you apply for it and you match it with all these other funds we talked about. Somebody's got to do the monitoring and compliance. Somebody's got to show the photo ID and produce the receipts. Two universities in the Northwest, University of Washington and Portland State University, just received massive awards from the EPA, $10 million to PSU. They're going to be setting up what's called the Willamette Partnership program in the next couple months. This is technical assistance providers to go into the smallest, the least capacity communities in our region and start doing that grant work and doing, because it comes down to capacity, either lack of capacity, number one, or the infrastructure costs are just massive. And we kind of look at on the federal side, like there's all these different programs and they all can pay for a little tiny thing. And so you're making little stabs at the water treatment plant, or you're getting broadband or this or that. How can we kind of package all of this on a continuum where you use your DLCD funding or Business Oregon funding for the plan, and then you've got brownfields money for the site cleanup or the site acquisition, and then you've bought down the cost enough where a private developer will come into a community of 400 or 600 and say, okay, we can make this pencil with a low-income housing tax credit or some other funding mechanism, and then you're going to build cottage clusters, 2 or 3 units on a single tax lot, and then at the very end of that continuum, you're turning these units over to individual home buyers with USDA Rural Development Home Loans or something else like that, so they can then be homeowners and build equity. And looking at this across a continuum instead of just the inefficiencies of these little projects, and then we gave you all this money and you have to build this thing, and now good luck maintaining it for the next decade. And we'll help you fix it, but we won't help you upgrade it, all that kind of mess. So.
Infrastructure funding is probably our on-site and off-site our most expensive obstacle. The cities and cities in Oregon have been limited on how much they're able to grow their tax. Measure 5 and 50 have limited the growth of real estate taxes, which has really set us up to be reliant on the system development charges that we charge to fund these. It is really our go-to mechanism. It's also something we haven't talked about, and I love that it's a hot button, so I'm kind of throwing it out there to bait everyone into that conversation. A system development charge in Hood River is about 2% of a project cost, so I consider it a red herring for this larger conversation. However, it's a real important feature. The radical escalation of infrastructure cost and its impact, and how it is quickly outscaled the means of local municipality is or even an individual builder is truly, it's astonishing. We just spent $4 million on a signalized intersection that wiped out our entire road fund, and I consider us relatively affluent community with a lot of market share. That's one intersection. I still have 70 lane miles of streets, and as you mentioned, once you build this stuff, that's only part of the cost. No SDC is available to maintain and operate and these roads, these pipes, this water. As soon as you put it in, that's the best it's ever going to be, and you're on the fast track of that stuff being obsolete, and you get to rebuild it. So I always sympathize that the developer has to pay for the thing, but they get to walk away. Once their maintenance is, and I get to live with this stuff forever. And so, hug those folks that drive those snow plows, and the water main never breaks when it's 65 degrees and sunny. Those are the folks that, leaving Thanksgiving dinner because it dropped to 0 degrees and they're out there in a puddle of water. Those are the folks that really, they're leaning into your community, they're keeping it running, and don't tell them about SDCs. So.
All right. I think Ariel, where's Ariel? Ariel, what was the LOC did a survey of infrastructure, water infrastructure recently. Was it $70 billion that we needed statewide to help?
24 billion
Yeah.
just for water
So, a lot.
infrastructure. Yeah.
I think we need $70 billion in my community.
Right. So, system development charges, I think, like you said, are red herring. Unfortunately, at the state, they're kind of putting the pressure on the cities to try and figure out a solution. We can't afford to give them away for free. And so I'm glad it's part of the conversation. I'm glad we're able to kind of talk about it and maybe push back because we still got to build these systems and we still got to maintain the systems. So we could use some more resources at the state level. I know the legislature this session has decided that housing and homelessness are a #1 priority they're going to continue to work on. So hopefully we'll get some additional funding through the legislature this session. Did you have another comment?
I was just going to put in a plug that Echo Northwest with Ghilardi Rothstein Group and FCS Group worked with OHCS to put together a study of system development charges and really try to tease out to what extent do they impact housing affordability and production, and what are some of the understanding, showing how important they are, and like Dustin was talking about, why cities are so reliant on them, and trying to kind of thread that needle of they're really important. We do really need them. You can't just take them away. And also, there are things you can do a little bit at the margins that help them hit the smallest housing, the lowest cost housing, the affordable housing a little less hard, so that on balance they're having less impact on housing production and affordability in your community. They aren't the thing, they aren't a silver bullet that, the 2%, in some communities it's not 2%, some communities it's 12%, but that whatever it is, it's probably not the sole problem, but that they are worth looking at in terms of how your rates are structured and whether you offer flexibility, reductions, something for affordable housing. There are some things that cities can do with SDCs and still not really impact your revenue collection. So I would encourage folks to look at that report if that's a topic that is coming up in your community.
All right, perfect. If this stuff interests you, I'm going to put in a couple plugs here. If you like housing, you like policy, the LOC is looking for people to participate in our policy committees. There are 7 policy level committees. That work starts this spring. I'm going to encourage especially my rural folks. We have a ton of folks that I-5 corridor that participate, but we need a lot more rural folks to participate. We need voices from all parts of the state. And we are doing it now in a virtual manner so that you can participate whether you live in Central Point or you live in Ontario, you live in Hermiston. We want you to participate because we want more voices at the table. And this is a great way, too, to help build your engagement and intellect in some of these policy levels, because then we need you to go down to the state capitol and speak to these issues that are impacting your community. So that application process closes at the end of October. Please go to the LOC website and apply to be a part of our policy level committees. Also, if you have further questions about housing, Ariel Nelson, she is our lobbyist and expert for the league. Please feel free to reach out to her, talk to her. She wants to know what your city issues are and how the league can help you in supporting those. Let's give these guys a big round of applause for their information today. Also on the app, besides the program PowerPoint, there is an option in there to give some feedback. The LOC wants to know how valuable this session is to you and sessions like this. So please give us some feedback on this session and sessions that you would like to see in the future. Please participate in the survey. Up next, we have a snack break in the exhibit hall, sponsored by Pacific Power, followed by our welcome and keynote that starts at 3:15. And then I want to remind you tonight, on the 12th floor, after the keynote address, we have an evening reception by the People of Color Caucus and the Women's Caucus at Topgolf Lounge from 8 to 10 for drinks, food, and prizes. Thank you for attendance today.